Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to see the moment Tuna returns to the fields too soon after her fever, until Alex grabs the hoe, stops her cold, and proves she doesn't have to fight alone anymore. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Morning sunlight slipped through bamboo leaves and painted soft patterns across Tuna's still pale face as she stepped out of the small house. She paused in the doorway and pulled in the countryside air, damp earth, fresh grass after rain, as if breathing could drag strength back into her bones. Her body felt heavy. Every joint reminded her the fever had only just released her. Yet inside her burned the same stubborn urge. The fields were waiting, and unfinished work never asked if she was ready. She picked up the hoe and started down the red dirt path. Her steps were slower than usual, but her gaze stayed fixed on the bright green patch ahead where young vegetable rows stretched toward the sun. Each stride became a silent vow. I have to do this for Henry, for the family, for everything that began here. A breeze cooled her skin and carried a faint warning, the kind the countryside gives you when it sees you pushing too hard. Tuna didn't look back. If she looked back, she might listen to her body. If she listened, she might stop. The field welcomed her with soft soil that yielded beneath worn rubber sandals. Her footprints sank deeper than they used to, weighted by lingering fatigue. She bent, wrapped both hands around the hoe handle, and began to work. At first, she kept it steady, slow strokes, familiar rhythm like she could trick her body into remembering its old strength. Fresh earth scent rose into the warming light, and the tender green rose stood calmly, indifferent to her struggle. Life waited for no one. Her body protested almost immediately. Shoulders ached, back tightened, breath shortened into sharp pulls of air. Sweat beaded on her forehead and slid down, mixing with dust that caught sunlight like tiny sparks. She bit her lip and focused on the pattern. Strike, lift, turn, repeat. In her mind flashed baby Henry asleep in his cradle, chubby cheeks rising and falling with even breaths. That image anchored her when the urge to pause grew too loud. It's too soon, her body insisted. You're not ready. Tuna shook her head as if she could toss the thought away. She glanced up at the wide blue sky and whispered, just a little more. Finish this section. She told herself labor could erase weakness, that sweat could push the fever shadow out of her muscles. Every swing became a private fight between will and limit, and she couldn't yet see which side would win. A shadow moved at the edge of the rows. Alex emerged from the narrow path, tall against the green expanse. He walked faster than usual. Polished shoes were already flecked with mud, but he didn't slow. The moment he saw Tuna bent over the soil, sweat shining at her temples, his brow furrowed hard. He crossed the distance in long strides and reached her as she lifted the hoe again. His hand closed over hers on the handle firm, not rough. Tuna, stop, he said, voice low and steady, worry unmistakable. The hoe froze midair. Tuna looked up, surprise flashing, then stubbornness. I'm fine, she answered too quickly, breath already too shallow to sell the lie. Just a little more. Alex shook his head, grip steady. You just recovered. Your body is still weak. Pushing like this will only wear you down. Tuna's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue that fields didn't hoe themselves, that food didn't appear because someone cared. She wanted to say she didn't have the luxury of rest. But Alex's gaze locked onto hers, deep, earnest, protective, in a way that made it hard to fight. Wait a few more days, he said. I don't want to see you collapse out here. Wind rustled through young leaves. A sparrow called somewhere far off. For a heartbeat, everything held still. Tuna's hands loosened, and the second she let go, exhaustion surged forward like a wave. Her shoulders trembled not from cold, but from the clash between determination and her body's quiet rebellion. Alex stood like a barrier between her and her own recklessness. His tone softened. Go home and rest, I'll handle the rest. Tuna swallowed. She didn't trust herself to speak without cracking, so she nodded slowly. A strange lightness bloomed in her chest, fragile relief born from being seen, from being cared for in the middle of her solitary fight. Back home, soft light fell across the old wooden cradle where baby Henry lay. The 2-month-old stirred with eyes still closed, tiny mouth searching instinctively. Tuna lifted him with arms that still trembled faintly. The warmth of his small body seeped through thin cloth and chased away the last fever chill buried in her bones. She settled into the rattan chair by the window and guided Henry to nurse. Quiet, rhythmic sounds filled the room like a lullaby. Tuna bowed her head, hair falling forward to hide her tired face. Each breath Henry took reminded her why she pushed past limits. Yet today, after Alex stopped her in the field, she admitted the fatigue ran deeper than muscle and bone. It lived in trying to carry everything alone. Her eyes glistened not with sorrow, but with a quiet emotion she couldn't name. Henry finished and released with a soft sigh, an unconscious smile flickering at his lips. Tuna stroked his back, and the velvety softness under her palm melted tension in her chest. Outside the window, countryside wind whispered through grass and damp earth. In this suspended moment, pressure dissolved and fragile hope took root. She murmured, "Mom will get better, for you." Alex, meanwhile, drove into the village with thoughts that refused to settle. He could manage production schedules and contracts, but he couldn't force Tuna to rest if her will refused. When he passed a roadside fruit stall, he slowed and pulled over on instinct. Oranges glowed heavy with juice. Apples shone red. Grapes glittered with dew. He chose in silence, picturing Tuna biting into crisp sweetness, cool fruit working like quiet medicine. He paid, set the bag on the passenger seat like a promise, and turned back toward her house. Lamplight flickered through the windows when he arrived. The door stood slightly ajar. Alex knocked gently and stepped inside. Tuna sat beside the cradle, hand patting Henry as he slept, chest rising and falling evenly. She looked up, surprise flickering, then softening into a tired but genuine smile. Alex set the fruit on the table and said quietly, "Oranges, apples, grapes. Eat them. Get strong soon." Tuna's fingertips brushed a cool orange, and warmth rose in her chest, the feeling of being thought of when she hadn't asked. "Thank you," she whispered, voice small. Alex didn't push for conversation. He pulled a chair across from her, close enough to share the room, far enough to let her breathe. For a while, they simply listened. The soft creak of the cradle, the distant rustle of bamboo outside, Henry's tiny sighs. Tuna felt the ache in her arm from the morning's effort, but beside it was a new sensation permission to stop. She traced the edge of the fruit bag as if it were proof. "I hate feeling weak," she admitted, eyes lowered. Alex answered gently, "Rest isn't weakness. It's how you stay here for Henry." Henry stirred once, then settled, and Tuna's shoulders finally dropped. "And for me," he added, "because I need you." She picked up an apple and took a careful bite. Tart sweet juice woke senses dulled by fatigue. For the first time that day, she smiled truly soft as a flower opening after rain. Alex watched, and the knot in his chest loosened, because he'd done something small and real to make sure she didn't fight alone. Tuna kept chewing slowly, as if she didn't want to rush the sweetness away. The apple tasted like clean water and sunlight, simple and sharp, and it reminded her how long it had been since she'd eaten without thinking about the next task. She glanced toward Henry's cradle. He slept with a tiny fist tucked under his cheek, breathing steady, unaware that his mother's body had been arguing with itself all day. Alex watched her in silence for a moment, then leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Tell me the truth," he said gently. "How do you feel right now?" Tuna hesitated. Habit told her to answer, "I'm fine." But the word felt too thin to carry the day. She lowered her gaze to the band of light on the floor and admitted, "I'm still weak. I just hate staying still." Alex nodded as if he'd expected it. "I know," he said, "but forcing yourself back into the field won't prove you're strong. It'll just pull you backward." Tuna swallowed. If I don't work, things pile up, she murmured. And when things pile up, I get scared. Alex's face softened. You're allowed to be scared, he said. You don't have to fight it by punishing your body. The room stayed quiet, not awkward, just full. Outside, bamboo leaves brushed each other in the wind. Somewhere far off, a motorbike passed, then faded. The house felt like it had settled into a slower rhythm, one Tuna wasn't used to trusting. Alex reached into the fruit bag and pulled out a bunch of grapes. He rinsed them at the sink without being asked, then placed them on a small plate beside Tuna's chair. The gesture was small, but it landed like care you could touch. Tuna's eyes glistened again. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I wanted to, Alex replied. And tomorrow, I'll want to again. She laughed softly, a tired sound. You're going to spoil me. Alex's smile was brief but sincere. Good, he said. You've been spoiling everyone else for too long. Henry shifted in his sleep and made a tiny noise. Both adults paused automatically, listening. When he settled again, Tuna exhaled and Alex's shoulders loosened with her. About the field, Alex said, lowering his voice as if the topic itself might wake Henry. I'll hire someone for a few days, just to finish the heavy work while you regain strength. Tuna's immediate instinct was resistance. That costs money, she said quickly. And people talk. Let them talk, Alex answered, calm. Your health is worth more than their opinions. Tuna's lips pressed together. It wasn't only pride, it was fear of dependency, fear of becoming someone who waited for help instead of making things happen. Alex seemed to read it. I'm not asking you to give up your independence, he said. I'm asking you to protect it. If you collapse again, you lose days. You lose weeks. That's worse. Tuna stared at her hands. The calluses were still there, even after a fever. Proof of her life, proof of what she'd carried. She wanted to argue, but the logic was too clean. Okay, she said finally, voice small. A few days. Alex nodded once, like that was enough victory for tonight. He stood and moved quietly toward the window, checking the latch, then returned to the cradle. He didn't pick Henry up. He simply watched him for a moment, face softening into something almost reverent. Tuna watched Alex watching Henry, and the scene tugged at her heart. She remembered the field Alex's hand over hers on the hoe, his steady voice telling her to stop. It hadn't felt like control. It had felt like someone finally seeing the line she was about to cross. Alex turned back to her. Did you take all your medicine, he asked. Tuna nodded. This morning. And you'll take it tonight, he said, more statement than question. Tuna smiled faintly. Yes, boss. Alex raised an eyebrow. Don't tease, he said, but his tone softened into a laugh. I'm serious. I know, Tuna replied. Her voice grew quieter. Thank you for stopping me. I didn't realize how close I was. Alex sat back down across from her, hands clasped. You're always close, he said honestly, because you don't let yourself rest until your body forces it. The words landed with gentle truth, not accusation. Tuna felt heat rise behind her eyes. She blinked it away, but one tear slid down anyway. Alex didn't rush to wipe it. He simply stayed. Presence, not pressure. After a while, Tuna reached for another slice of apple and ate it slowly. The sweetness settled her stomach. The quiet settled her mind. For the first time in days, she could imagine tomorrow without panic. Outside, the sky darkened fully. Stars began to prick through the black. The lamp cast a small circle of light over the table, the fruit, the cradle, everything else blurred into softness. Alex checked his phone once, then turned it face down. I should go, he said, though his voice carried reluctance. Tuna looked up quickly. You're leaving? Just to the village, he answered. I'll be back early. I promised the foreman I'd confirm the delivery schedule. Tuna's chest tightened, the old fear rising. People leave, and the burden returns. She hated that she felt it. Alex saw it immediately. "I'm not disappearing," he said firmly. "I'll come back, and if you need me, you call." Tuna nodded, forcing calm. "Okay." Alex stood, then hesitated. He stepped closer and rested his hand lightly on her shoulder, the same quiet reassurance he'd given in the field. "Rest tonight," he said. "No chores, no extra work, just sleep." Tuna gave a small laugh. "Henry won't allow that." Alex smiled. "Then rest between his demands," he said, "and eat fruit. I'll buy more if you finish it." Tuna's smile widened. Genuine now. Deal. Alex moved to the door, stopped, then looked back at the room one last time. Tuna in the chair, Henry breathing in the cradle, the fruit on the table like a small, bright promise. He nodded to himself, as if sealing an internal vow. After he left, the house didn't feel empty the way it usually did. The air still held his concern, his quiet insistence. Tuna picked Henry up when he finally stirred, fed him, and rocked him back to sleep. Her body still felt weak, but her mind felt less alone. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain back, a finger's width. The field lay beyond the bamboo fence, dark now, but she could still picture the rows she tried to finish alone. She imagined Alex tomorrow, hiring hands, checking the soil, making sure the work moved without costing her body more days. For years, Tuna had measured love by endurance, how much pain she could swallow without asking for help. Tonight, she understood another measure, how much care you allow in, even when pride fights it. She set a grape on her tongue and let it burst sweetly, then smiled at the absurdity of feeling comforted by fruit. Somewhere in the cradle, Henry sighed and relaxed again. Before turning off the lamp, she opened her book again. She read a few lines, then paused, listening to the night sounds outside. She thought of Alex at the workshop, of the fruit stall, of the way he'd chosen to come back to her house with something simple instead of another lecture. "Mom will get better," she whispered to Henry's sleeping face, "and will learn to rest too." The words didn't feel like a fragile wish anymore. They felt like a plan. After recovering from a fever, Tuna forces herself back to the fields, determined to work for Henry despite lingering weakness and aching joints. In the vegetable rows, her body protests with short breath and shaking shoulders, but she pushes through until Alex appears, stops her by placing his hand over hers on the hoe, and insists she rest. Back home, Tuna nurses 2-month-old Henry and finally admits how deep her fatigue runs beyond her body into the loneliness of carrying everything alone. Alex visits later with a bag of fruit, urging her to nourish herself and recover properly. In a quiet, intimate conversation, he gently challenges her pride, offers practical help by hiring labor for a few days, and promises he won't disappear. Tuna agrees, feeling both relief and hope. As night falls, she feeds Henry, reads quietly, and realizes real strength isn't only endurance, it's allowing care in, so she can heal and keep going.